Now, before we jump into this one, I want to give my thanks to Manscaped for this holiday season. Now, everyone loves a bit of turkey and stuffing over Christmas, but you're going to be looking like a dessert, okay, with the Manscaped Performance Package 4.0. What better topic to talk with the in-laws about than what your balls are looking like, okay? And you can get the Ultimate Men's Hygiene Bundle on manscaped.com, and you can use the code LASTLAP on the screen for 20% off. Now, let's be totally honest, lads. One of the most daunting things about trimming downstairs are the cuts and nicks that you're going to end up getting. With this hygiene bundle, you can make sure your plums are looking as smooth as they need to be. Now just listen to this. Listen to all of the things you're going to be getting in this bundle. A Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, the Weed Whacker and Nose Hair trimmer, because we all know they can get into a bit of a state sometimes as well. We've got your Crop Preserver Ball Deodorant to make sure everything's smelling kind of fresh. Crop Reviver Toner, Performance Boxer Briefs, and a travel bag to hold all of your goodies as well. Now the Lawnmower 4.0 has a cutting edge, if you'll excuse the pun, ceramic blade that makes sure there's no cuts and nicks, and it's even waterproof as well, just in case you get into some sort of other incident whilst you're shaving. The Weed Whacker for your nose and ears has a 360-degree device that makes it really, really easy to get those pesky nose and ear hairs out. As I mentioned at the start, you can get 20% off products at manscaped.com using the code LASTLAP, okay? It's on the screen. That's 20% off and free shipping as well. You be thankful for manscaped.com. Your balls will thank you too. Now let's get back into the podcast.
All right, you lot, don't forget to give us a follow on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and while you're at it, give us a 5-star rating. Trust me, it really does help us out.
We spoke about one man that's obviously very popular in America because of the way that he's embraced American culture, and that's Daniel Ricciardo. And I want to ask both of you here on this one, actually, because obviously you are McLaren fan TV quite literally, like even representing right now.
Always have to rep.
Always. Solid Grand Prix. I mean, obviously, barring the Tsunoda incident.
Yeah.
In terms of a drive, very solid. Still looking for a seat next season. Do you think that has some sort of influence on where he ends up and what he ends up doing next year? I'll start with you.
What, in terms of what he done last weekend?
Yeah, in terms of that, because that at least, I feel like that's going to at least give him some sort of confidence.
Yeah. From the sounds of it, it seems like nobody came to him because it seemed, he was sort of like, yeah, I can confirm I'm not going to be racing next year, blah, blah. And it's a case of, I guess, maybe down the pecking order of Haas and Williams and whoever the case may be, it seemed like nobody approached him. Because I remember we was on the pod here and I said, why is he rejecting jobs? If that, just looking from the outside, I was thinking, why is he not having another job there? Why is it so-and-so's getting a seat and somebody else is taking another seat? But it definitely will, I think this race that he had will definitely put him back on people's radar because you can easily be forgotten once you do 1 year out. I mean, Hülkenberg, you mentioned before, it's weird how he's not got a seat until this day. And, and it's not because of the lack of talent. The guy is talented. And the podium thing is so annoying because it's like, that shouldn't define his career, not at all. He's been very, very unlucky.
Some of the drives that he's had.
Been phenomenal. But you would
that's some of the cars he had in the context.
Exactly.
I agree completely.
It was that first season at Williams in that Brazil qualifying section.
Yeah, that's right. F1 tweeted that recently, didn't they? And I saw how impressive at the time. It was like, wow, this kid's come out of nowhere.
Crazy.
It was brilliant.
Really think about it.
It was different level. So, I'm just hoping, like, for Ricciardo's sake, look, when he was at McLaren, I did get frustrated and I wished, because it was such a match made in heaven. I always thought McLaren having him, especially when we lost Sainz, I thought, oh God, what are we going to do? And then when it was Ricciardo, I was like, do you know what, Sainz, good luck. And, type of thing. I thought Ricciardo will be a perfect fit. And obviously he's such a likable person. So it's interesting that you mentioned him in terms of how you speak to him. But I hope that it does not leave him, I hope he's not forgotten. He did say he's going to be on the paddock, sort of. He's going to be in and around. So he's already got a deal in some case, shape or form.
Capacity.
Yeah, in some way. So, it will definitely help him. And if there's something that happens where, like a Hülkenberg, where he has to come in and substitute someone, if he gets that opportunity to do that, I think he'll be impressive. Why it's come at this time in terms of how good his performance is, I don't know. I think it's one of those, once he had that contact with Tsunoda, it was like, okay, look, we're going to throw everything at it and let's see what happens. Yeah. And it's just, again, it's a confidence thing, I guess, with Danny Rick at the end of the day. It's never been a talent problem. I do hope I wish he was driving next year for a different team, but Yeah, we'll have to wait and see. I definitely think his stocks haven't gone so far down as it looked this season.
Yeah,
and that race has definitely helped him. It can't have made any harm. So it can only help him.
Nate, obviously, you're talking about the rumours in the paddock. The rumour mill must spin relentlessly with Daniel Ricciardo, right?
Yeah, it has all year, and it's interesting because that story actually going into the summer break was one of the big ones. I kind of got wind of the fact that McLaren had potentially were moving on from Daniel, kind of coming back from Budapest. So I was ready for.
So was that the first point at which you thought that might be a possibility?
I thought it might be a possibility a bit earlier than that, just from things I'd heard. But I didn't. Okay. What I thought was that they were looking to who they're going to get in 2024 already. Piastri's name had kind of come up, but it sounds like that was something Ricciardo was aware was very much on the cards for quite a while. Monaco kind of time is from the sounds of it. So I think that's probably. And this is not to make excuses for everything, because I think he's been the first to admit his performances haven't been up to scratch. Sure. But I think it's been difficult for him to be racing knowing that that's coming, and obviously they were discussing the buyout of the contract and stuff like that over the summer. But I remember when that came out, I was like, wow, like where's he going to go? Mm-hmm. And at the time, Alpine seemed like the most logical choice for him to go to.
Yeah.
But I remember as that was breaking, I was looking, and the first thought I was like, well, he'll definitely be on the grid in some capacity next year. I was sure of that, as we found out more details, and as time has gone on, it's been strange because he's gone further and further away from or at least seeming to want to go to one of those options. You mentioned Haas and Williams.
Yeah.
I was surprised he didn't take that. I thought him and Gunther Steiner would have been the greatest pairing ever seen in Formula 1.
That needs a Netflix documentary on its own.
And as far as I know, the information that I have is that Steiner reached out to Ricciardo pretty early on, which isn't the craziest thing. Like that, you'd actually be surprised. One of the things you hear a lot in the paddock is, oh, this guy's talking to this guy, and it's like, yeah, well, that's not that surprising. He knows that engineer from his time at this team, and they're probably saying like, what are you doing next year, or what's your contract?
Yeah, and then the links come through that.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that actually happens in Formula 1 a lot more than people give credit for, and sometimes it's very innocuous.
I guess that's where even just the rumors come from. Like, a lot of the time knows this mechanic, and then I said, I'm maybe thinking about Williams next year, but I don't know for sure. And then suddenly that's turned into
and sometimes speaking
to Williams.
Absolutely, and sometimes you hear stuff in the paddock, and you're like, okay, who benefits from this story being out there? Yeah. And this is not at all to throw Piastri or Mark Webber under the bus at all, because I think like it's great that Piastri's coming in. But I remember around Canada, everyone was saying like, oh, Piastri's going to Williams. Definitely. And I was talking to people at Williams, and I think we've been talking to him. I don't know where that's going from. And everyone was like, sounds like Webber's, but it meant that people were talking about Piastri. And for him, it meant he'd done his job really well, because people were talking about Oscar. People were saying like, and also it's a good test then. If you say Oscar Piastri's going to Williams, everyone goes, what? Piastri's going to Williams? You get a sense of, but everyone was like, yeah, that makes sense. So for Williams and for Piastri and for Webber, it made a lot of sense. Sometimes things come out of there. Sometimes rumors come and you're like, where did this start? Because this is definitely not true. You try and find the original source and you can't. But yeah, with Ricciardo, it's kind of been an overdrive. And to be honest with you, it's kind of it's been strange in a way, because I thought they'd want to get things sorted straight away. When McLaren made the announcement, I think he was quite convinced he'd go to Alpine. I think that Alpine, you're right, it did seem like people didn't kind of actively approach him. I think Steiner called him, it wasn't, we have to get you here. It's like, what are you doing next year type of thing.
Yep.
And so I think that maybe the year out has kind of been forced on him a bit more than, because obviously it came from McLaren not wanting him next year.
Yeah. Because what was weird to me was that Ricciardo made his announcement, and literally, he had his statement, I will be driving for McLaren next year, blah, blah, type of thing. Or I'm like, he didn't sort of, he was careful, I think, in terms of how he worded it.
Because it wasn't a few months before. Yeah, that's right.
And it was sort of like, so, I was sitting there thinking, okay, look, we got him for another year, let's just get behind him and hopefully he'll improve in that McLaren car. And then it was like, what was it, a month later, a couple of weeks later, then it came out that actually he's not going to be driving for
that's right.
McLaren in Formula 1.
And the phrasing of that was interesting, because I think, if I'm right in saying it was, he intends to see out his contract.
Yes.
The phrase he used. And so I think one thing that McLaren probably misstepped on was all the exit clauses were on Daniel's side. Yeah. They didn't have anything where they could say, which is not a great deal to put a driver on. It doesn't matter who they are. You should never have that kind of contract. And I think that their hope was Ricciardo would kind of save them the embarrassment and trigger one of those clauses on his side and walk away. I don't know why you'd expect a driver to do that, but I think that's kind of what they were hoping. So his statement was, if you want me to go, I'll go, but you're going to have to buy out second year of my contract, which is completely entitled to him to say. But it did seem to change around quickly, and I think that to drive in that environment, and he's very popular within McLaren. I think him and Zach Brown do still get on. I know people suggest they don't, But Zach Brown's a businessman. He thought, this isn't working. Let's move on from it. You know, he did the same. You know, there's McLaren's done the same with Honda over the last few years. Let's just get rid of it. Let's move on. Must have been difficult. So hopefully Mexico, I think you're so right about his stock not going down as far. I think people have very short memories in Formula One. They remember the more recent, and I include myself in that. That's not a people on Twitter. I have one of the shortest memories going. I barely remember what I did the other day. But people remember your most recent successes. So if he can have 2 more good races, leave on that high, when you're thinking about him next year as a driver, you remember that, and you're like, I remember him in Mexico. He had that great drive. So hopefully that. Because the worst thing would be for him to walk away, and then people would be like, "Oh, he's just a TV star now, or he's just whatever he's doing now."
I think it can offer so much more than that, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think my prediction would be he's a reserve driver next year for one of the top 2 teams, so Merck or Red Bull. I think he'll probably end up at one of those 2, just based on what I've heard. And I think he wants to stay involved in F1 where he can.
Yeah, but
it's still an underwhelming position for a guy that good to be in. You would never have called it 2 years ago.
That's the tough thing as well, because obviously you've got. Yeah, fine. You're a not development driver, but you're like test driver, I guess. Obviously for like
just a different name now, basically.
It is, yeah. But like, there's still if he got that job, there's that affiliation. But ultimately, would you assume that his chance at a big drive like that, even if he did perform well, and maybe even jumped in for a couple of races and performed well next season or whatever, do you think that chance at a big seat is gone potentially, even if he's working with Mercedes or Red Bull?
Yeah, it is. Look, it's really difficult to see where he go in terms of going to a top team. Because if you look at, Mercedes, Lewis is talking about signing for another 3 years. George Russell's there for a few more years. Ferrari, Sainz is there for I think 3 more. Leclerc's probably going to sign another deal. I keep saying
there's not really an in point. Is
there? Yeah. So and then Red Bull, Perez is there for another 2 years after this one. Yeah. So and his big thing is he wants to come back in 2024. Teams don't often hand out 1-year deals. It's rare that teams do that. So if he wanted to go to a midfield team or a lower team and get a 1-year deal, not saying it's impossible. Sometimes teams say, let's do a 1+1 where both sides have to agree to extend, and it gives teams the flexibility to do what they want. Yeah. But in terms of that top deal, even if he was to step in for a Mercedes for 1 race or 2 races or Red Bull, they're still committed to those guys they've got at the team. Yeah. So, and you can't rule it out. I mean, look at Fernando Alonso at Aston Martin would have never called that. Nick De Vries suddenly, his career looked dead, and his Formula One chances looked like dead and buried. I'm so glad he got that chance on the basis of being a reserve driver and having that appearance in that sub role. But it's really difficult. And him going back to this is Ricciardo I'm talking about now. Going back to Alpine, I think is pretty unlikely given the fact that they had the chance this year, didn't take him. Don't think he'd go back to McLaren. So suddenly you've got the 2 teams in the middle that look very unlikely. 3 teams above look fairly unlikely. And I'm not sure whether he'd want to drive for one of the teams below, because if he did, he'd probably have signed for one of them this year. So it is difficult, but it's so hard. A year out, a year from now, some stuff could happen that we don't know about that could open things up. So it's always difficult to rule it out completely. But I was thinking about this, recently, and it's just so difficult to call where he ends up.
Yeah, because I think with Albon being a reserve driver last year with Red Bull, and we got to credit in part to him, because obviously that Red Bull is a machine this year. Yeah. And it's kind of got him back on the grid again with that Williams.
Yeah, right? Albon's a great example as well. Yeah.
So it's not over in terms of Danny Rick, I don't think. And there's plenty of space, I think, for him. And who knows? I think he might have to take a leaf out of Albon's book and be like, sort of how he sort of stayed relevant even when he wasn't on the grid, when we didn't see a lot of him last year. So I think there will definitely be a place for him.
There's definitely one big carrot for a lot of drivers at the moment, and that's Audi coming in. In 26. Yeah. So I think that is such a huge opportunity. The investment they're probably going to put into Formula One. So if I was Ricciardo, what I think is, if I'm taking this year out, let's make sure that when Audi are looking at who they want for 26, and the team that's obviously now is Alfa Romeo, that I'm top of their list. Yeah. I'm available. I'm in form. I'm marketable as well, and I don't think he's going to have an issue there. Yeah. And he's young enough just about that makes sense down the line. If he was like 35, you'd be like, there's younger guys there. So I think that's key for him. And it's difficult to stay relevant and I say popular or in people's good books, I guess, for that long. Yeah. But that to me, if you're talking about a top team or a top opportunity, that seems like actually weirdly his most likely one, even if it seems so far away. And there's a few drivers like that you look at, you're like, even someone like Lando, if stuff at McLaren, if by then he's still like McLaren's not going anywhere.
Stop touting. Because I'm seeing it far too much on social media. Yeah, Lando's getting linked with other places.
Everywhere,
I'm just saying, everyone step back.
I mean, I hope McLaren are in a position where Lando can challenge. I think, like at the moment, he's not had that opportunity, and that's what was the shame with Ricciardo as well. I think was that he was struggling, and the performance wasn't there. But I think he's probably, in a weird way, has been lucky with that, because if Lando was winning races and Ricciardo was finishing 8th every weekend, I think his stock would have been battered. But the fact that there's at least enough of a question mark of how much of this is the car not being in the right place and how much is Ricciardo.
I think it's so packed as well that absolutely small margins can mean so much.